My name is Scarlett. I'm a recently graduated student from Leeds and I'm currently looking for some jobs. I'm from Cambridge and I live with my parents. And I am passionate about rowing and I'm passionate about sustainability and I'm passionate about teaching. I was thinking about its kind of objective meaning of like what you learn in politics A level, which is that you kind of have the right to vote in an institution where you trust that the vote that you put in is valid and ends in some kind of result. But I was thinking about how democracy kind of infiltrates our lives emotionally and every day. And I think an important part of that is the kind of belief that you can exist safely so that your existence is protected and your existence is safe, and that your kind of right to identity and right to self-expression is protected within democracy, and was thinking a lot about that because of the fact that we might operate in an objective democracy and that we still vote, but a lot of people's right to exist is being threatened at the moment. And the kind of, you know, even how we label people. So, like an illegal migrant, even though there's no such thing as an illegal human, because they have a right to exist, right? And they have a right to be where they are. So, yeah, I think when I think about it on a kind of colloquial level, it's like, yeah, your day-to-day existence and how safe you feel and entitled you feel to be within that existence. I was also thinking about kind of democracy's relationship with civil society, and that often when we enforce democracy, we're not doing it proactively, but we live in a kind of long established democracy where it's become second nature, and how democracy's relationship with civil society changes and how it fluctuates, and how maybe we're in this kind of period of fluctuation at the moment. But civil society basically operates democratically, right? So you are interacting with other people in a way that you feel that you would want to be interacted with, and that is usually in a democratic way. So getting in a queue is inherently democratic, right? Because it all puts you on the same level and you wait the same time. But in a more kind of proactive way, I guess I am very politically engaged, more so than most of my peers. And so if I'm thinking about it proactively, it would be things like, when I was 16, going on the radio and debating that 16-year-olds should get the vote and things like that. But actually, you know, democracy has to be inherent across all structures and needs to be kind of passive as well as proactive. And so, treating people with respect and respecting their identity is, I guess, how people go about democracy in their day-to-day lives, much more than kind of doing these single bursts of political activism that are defining but are not, you know, they're not every day. I don't know if I would feel this trusting in institutions now, but this I definitely had this idea where I did feel safe to exist with this opinion and this entitlement that I should be, you know, allowed to exercise my democratic right to vote at the age of 16, and felt that my vote was valuable enough to debate for that. Whereas now, and I personally do still think my vote is very valuable, but I know that there are lots of people who feel very apathetic, and whether a vote now is as worth kind of debating because you felt that it had that gravity as it was when I was 16. I have no idea. But yeah, having always grown up in a very politically active household, there was no option for me to be, you know, not interested in the world around me. So, going on and debating about that, and also that my kind of parents have given me this confidence to believe that I'm entitled to an opinion that I think should be heard by other people. And even at the age of 16, going on the radio and thinking that my opinion is worthwhile is another part of democracy, and not making people feel that their opinion is less important than someone else's opinion. Um, So yeah, I think this kind of more existential interest in the world around me and not understanding how people can separate politics from every day, because everything you do is political, and everything you do has a political implication. And like being from a sport background where sport has this very complicated relationship with politics, and some people feel that politics shouldn't be involved in sport, and vice versa, but actually that, yeah, as I said, sport can never be separate from politics. And most recently, I'm into cycling, and the Vuelta, which is a big world tour in Spain, is being stopped at the moment by Palestine protests. And there's been this kind of dialogue in the media of, is this fair that the Palestinian protesters are stopping a sporting event that has nothing to do with Palestine, but actually, Israel Premier Tech is a team within professional cycling, and everything has something to do with Palestine. Every team there is pretty much sponsored by an oil and gas sponsor. Like there's UAE Team Emirates, there's Israel Premier Tech, there's Bahrain Victorious. And some riders have said that this is irresponsible of the Palestine protesters and it's unfairly affecting them, whereas some have said, I sympathize with them. So I think coming from a sporting background where lots of people are not that political, I've always brought politics into sport, and with rowing as well, like the relationship between rowing and water companies and sewage, and I don't understand how people can not care about that. So kind of rounding back to the democracy part, of even feeling that I have the power to give those opinions when I'm in a sporting setting means that some kind of democracy must be functioning, because it's low risk. I'm not risking my life. I'm not risking anything significant by saying these opinions, which means that despite what maybe people's feelings are at the moment, that democracy is somewhat still intact. I think about this a lot, and I worry about it a lot. And I think that like individualism is pretty much responsible for most of the problems that we are currently contending with. And having done history, like kind of an area of special interest for me was the kind of Reagan Thatcher special relationship, and how so there was recently quite a controversial Thatcher statue put up in Grantham, and people, which is her where she was born, and people thought it was controversial because they were like, she's not a historical figure. Some people were like, she is now a historical figure because she's died, but I don't think she is at all. And I think, as we've allowed Reaganite and Thatcherite economics to kind of become the status quo, it's like literally fundamentally changed how we view each other, and we've become much more atomistic. And obviously that helps within capitalism, because if you isolate individuals, they're less powerful. And as I said before, democracy can't really exist separately from civil society, and it also can't exist separately from collectivism, because obviously you need to trust that your vote is going into a system and being processed by someone else. So inherently there is a communal aspect to it, and there is a trust in another person. And I think as we become more and more individualized, that kind of trust between people is being kind of hemorrhaged in different directions, whether it's for a culture war or whether it's as simple as the growth of SUVs as a symptom of individualism. And so I think that is definitely the main fault line for me, is this idea that we exist to kind of serve no one but ourselves, and how capitalism plays into that. So like the most obvious example is self-care, and this idea that self-care has replaced third spaces and community. So instead of, you feel lonely and you feel bad, not because there's no third spaces for you to exist in anymore, but actually because your skin is bad, or because you're not putting yourself first, or you're not buying this candle that does this. And I think self-care is a really insidious way of perpetuating that actually you're the only individual that can fulfill your own needs, which obviously is not true. And then, from a democracy standpoint, I think that as a result of people trusting people less, there is much less trust in institutions. And as a result, people don't feel as validated within democracy. And that is coming from a place of validity. And I know that it's very privileged for me to say that why shouldn't we trust our institutions when the institutions generally work in my favour, because I live in the south of England, I'm white, and I come from a middle class background. So generally, my life is not as adversely affected by political corruption as someone else's life. But I think, and actually was watching this video yesterday that the Times have just released about the difference between perception at the moment and reality. So the perception is that everything is kind of descending into anarchy and that crime rate is increasing, and this is obviously because of the migrant population which has doubled in the last, I think it was like 20 years or something. And then the Times kind of, and I don't like the Times particularly, but I thought it was a really good piece of journalism, talked about how violent crime has like almost halved in the last 15 years and theft has gone down hugely. And the problem is that visible crime, so things like shoplifting, has gone up. And as a result, politicians have obviously capitalized on that to create this sense of kind of fear and like existential foreboding that everything is descending into this kind of chaos. And I think, again, all comes back to individualism, the idea that you can't trust or you don't owe anything to the person next to you. Well, the selfish part of me just wants to move to like a co-op or move to Scandinavia and just live my own isolated life and kind of forget what is happening in the world around me and live this more collective life where democracy feels like it's not being infringed on. But I know that actually that's not the reality, and I know that Scandinavia are also having issues with lack of trust in their institutions. So I think it's really difficult, and I think that I'm not qualified to give the answer in any way. But I think that one of the first steps is creating more communal spaces again. And I know that despite all of the commotion going on with the Labour government and the kind of backlash that they're getting, that actually there is steps. So the 500 million investment in youth clubs is really important in tackling supposedly antisocial behaviour that is rife amongst teenagers at the moment. And so re-grasping third spaces and then kind of detaching ourselves from materially defining ourselves by like everything that we buy, which just inherently isolates us from other people. But I think, I don't know, unless there's some kind of quite radical change, but I don't know if radical change can be done incrementally, and having done history, like that's always a debate, and there's like two schools of like everything happens in these like big explosive events, and that's kind of the more traditional school of history, and then there's like actually incremental changes then end up having this kind of revolutionary effect in a more passive way. I think also climate and kind of this impending climate crisis that people have definitely put on the back burner in, substitute of culture war and focusing on hating other people, is something that I've really struggled to deal with, of like, why is there no climate coverage in the news at the moment when we are in the climate crisis, and how maybe that will bring some sense of urgency to create greater democratic cohesion. I don't know what will happen. And the US is a huge threat because democratically they're ruthless. They don't. There's this kind of shameless abandonment of democratic etiquette that isn't being challenged by top level people. against Trump, and whether kind of countries follow suit or whether they see how that went and kind of retaliate the other way. But respect and trust in institutions is fundamental to a democracy, because institutions have to implement democracy. And so if those at the top are saying, you don't need to follow this law, or you don't need to be educated by the Department of Education because it doesn't exist anymore, what does that mean for how you treat your neighbor or someone around you democratically? I don't know. But yeah, I think the first place to start is that we've gotten so individualized that we've failed to see that actually there's common interest in democracy. And so hopefully building up more community space and third space and moving people away from being defined by what they consume would be my ideal way to kind of not re-establish democracy, because I don't think democracy is going anywhere, but re-establish people's trust in democracy maybe.